Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This time I'd like to call to order the special meeting of the Board of County Commissioners for Tuesday, June 25th, 2019. Madam Clerk, next item.
Please stand for the flag salute.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Next item, please.
Roll call. Commissioner O'Donnell.
Present.
Commissioner Cruz.
Present.
Commissioner Howell.
Present.
Commissioner Meitzner. Chairman Dennis.
Present. Next item, please.
Public agenda.
I have 5 individuals signed up to speak on public agenda. The first one is Randall Rogers. So would you approach the podium and state your name for the record, please?
My name is Randall E. Rogers, and I live in the southern part of Sedgwick County. I also have lived there for almost 36 years. I'm going to keep this short and sweet. I hope you guys get together and get those pumps running one way or another, because my wife and I and everybody in my neighborhood is fighting this blasted water table coming up. They shut them down. When we first moved out there, it seemed like maybe a year later, and we started having problems with the water table coming back up. Now this time, I've got this is the third time, and we've got water coming in my basement area like it's a artesian well, let's put it that way, with sand. That's no fun. On the inside, we're holding it off. On the outside, underneath where my deck is, and the other area, it's like a spring. I could raise catfish in that sucker. But if they get those pumps running, like they did a number of years ago, that table will drop, and it does help us completely. And it isn't just a dozen homes. All up and down hillside from about, oh good Lord, what is it, Hancock, and just north of that. Hydraulic, I know, is getting it the same direction, all the way down to Highway 53. We're getting drowned out is what it is. So if you guys would find it some way to get those pumps going again, it would be deeply appreciated. I'm getting tired of replacing sheetrock and getting nailed for it. Mr. Howell and Mr. O'Donnell, I believe, voted for that, and I appreciate that. But we need more, about 3 more, I think, to get this thing rolling. That's about all I have to say, gentlemen. Any questions?
Thank you. Next individual I have signed up is Ruth Baker. Please approach the podium, state your name. You have 3 minutes.
My name is Ruth Baker. Excuse me. I live at 3520 East 103rd Street, Court South. I'm in Commissioner O'Donnell's district. He's been in contact with many of us and knows our stories. I attended your staff meeting last Tuesday on the groundwater issue. I attended and spoke at your meeting last week. The groundwater situation in southern Sedgwick County has worsened since I spoke with you last. Let me tell you what Sunday morning was like for my family. My husband and I were half awake when the power went out at 5. In a well-practiced routine, we jumped out of bed, dressed, and ran to start the generator. My husband ran outside in the pouring rain and started the generator while I ran downstairs to start connecting sump pumps to extension cords. While doing that, I started dialing neighbors to make sure they were aware and awake and getting their generators running. In the process, one neighbor mentioned there was a tornado warning. I yelled it up the stairs to my husband, who was at the back door bearing the brunt of the wind and the rain. As I did so, I turned to see my 3 kids huddled on the dark stairs wondering what to do and where to go. I was standing in water at that point and couldn't decide where to send them. I didn't want them standing in the basement water because we had not yet had the time to switch off the circuit breakers. The water was coming in fast, and in our rushed state of mind, I didn't know what to do. So what should I do? Send my kids to the basement to stand in the dark in the water in a quickly flooding basement, or stand upstairs and risk the danger of a tornado? While our generator was running, we gained an inch of water every 10 minutes. I know this because I had a yardstick taped at the base of the stairs in preparation for such an event. We continued to gain an inch of water every 10 minutes until the adrenaline wore off, the storm passed, and it became daylight. An hour and a half after the power went out, I started putting two and two together and realized that while the generator was running, it wasn't working, and the sump pumps were not getting power. We frantically called a friend and asked him to come help us out. He showed up 20 minutes later with a generator, and we got the situation turned around. We had 12 inches of water before we started to win the battle. I was at the Derby Lowe's when they opened at 8, and by 8:03 they had sold out all of their generators. Many people were in the same situation. We have had water in our basement for 4 weeks now. As of this morning, our water table sits at 41 inches below the ground. This isn't a flooding issue, it is a groundwater issue. I have 5 sump pumps operating in 3 holes. Those pumps are moving 18,000 gallons an hour out from under my basement. That is 400,000 gallons a day. I only found out about this meeting yesterday evening. Most people were preparing to attend Derby's meeting tonight when they are off work. This last-minute notice makes it so that many people cannot show up and speak. It feels underhanded to schedule a last-minute meeting and not invite the people that it affects. You don't see a crowd of people behind me, but they are there. Many people work and can't make it. Some fear leaving their homes and losing power while they are gone. Many people are just plumb worn out from staying up to fight the water. Many people like Justin, Adriana Gruby, who you saw on the news Sunday night with their 6 children. Crandall Johnson, who has sewage backing up in his basement. Dilbert and Sandy Antle, who have as much as 14 inches in their basement. Jeff Zimmerman, who like us has had water in his basement since Memorial Day weekend. Jerry and Georgia Ingstrand, who have 3 sump pumps and a basement floor crisscrossed with French drains that they put in at the very first flood in '08. You ask why we are seeking help from Sedgwick County. We are a group of neighborhoods spread between Derby, Hayesville, and Mulvane. We are outside city limits and in the county. Who else would we turn to for help? Derby tells us that only 1 pump is working. The cost is so low to run one well. Why would you say no to our request, even if you don't believe it works? A portion of your county is in dire need for help. We have done everything in our power to protect our properties and our families, but we are beyond what we can do, and we are coming to plead for your help. A long-term solution is certainly in our best interest, but for this desperate moment, we need your help. Thank you.
Next individual I have signed up is Rachel Rogers. Approach the podium, state your name for the record, and you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. My name is Rachel Rogers. I also live in southern Sedgwick County. I'm here to discuss the dewatering, turning the wells on. Kind of to add what they've already said, our experience Sunday morning. My husband and I have 9 children, 8 of whom live with us, age ranging 16 down to 6 months. My 2-year-old son, severely disabled, he broke his leg 3 days before our basement flooded on Father's Day. We spent 13 hours trying to keep up with the water in our basement. 4 children woke up to their beds surrounded by water. We saved what we could. Sunday morning, same situation. You have split seconds. You hear the sirens, the power goes out, the water starts rising back up into our basement. Where are we supposed to go? My husband says, get him in the basement. We were all in our pajamas. My son's cast. It's important to keep it dry. How do you do that in flood water? So that was my 16-year-old's responsibility, keep that cast dry. We spent 45 minutes sitting in cold water in our basement. My kids were crying. They now have nightmares. And my 4-year-old son keeps asking, are the sirens coming back? Our immediate needs are to get the water that we are pumping from seeping down into the soil and then back into our homes. Our ditches are not draining. I don't know if Salem Township is overwhelmed and can't handle that, but we need to get the standing water out of our ditches somewhere. I've noticed the water table coming up the street, north. One more house it's got to go through till it gets to the big ditch. We're worried about our laterals. We're worried about our septics that we just put in 2 years ago that cost $9,000. We're worried about our electric bills. How are we as a family on one income of 10 going to pay our electric bills? I just will close with a few questions. Is there a way to get assistance from the county or with Westar for our electric bills? We've got 6 fans. Personally, we have 6 fans running 24/7 since Father's Day. And we're not talking little fans. We're talking industrial-sized construction site fans to try and keep up with the mold. and the humidity. We are pumping, one sump pump pumps 1,800 gallons per hour. Every time it rains, we've got to add the second pump. So the assistance with the electric bills, and with all the talk of how much this is going to cost in this, and I understand you can't tell Derby or their own community, they're going to do what they're going to do. Is there a way to purchase these two wells in question? Can the county purchase these wells and take care of this issue as a county matter? That's just one thought. But the biggest need is to get the water out of the ditches some way. I'll grab a shovel if that helps. So thank you for taking this issue on. It's more than just 11 homes. There's hundreds of us. And like she said, we can't all be here because somebody has to go to work to pay our bills. Thank you.
Thank you. Next individual is Shirley Young. Please state your name for the record. You have 3 minutes.
I'm Shirley Young. I live in Hancock Acres. We have lived there for 35 years. We are now in our 70s, and my husband has many health issues. We have had to hire a restoration company to come and help tear out our basement again from 2 years ago. After living there 33 years, we had never had water in our basement before. And Sunday morning, when the sirens went off, I called my younger son to rush over with a generator while we sat on the steps when the sirens were going off and water was rising. Our whole basement is destroyed now. And I would really think you could consider helping us out. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Randy White. State your name for the record. You have 3 minutes.
Hi, I'm Randy White. This is also kind of impromptu for me to come here. Just learned about all this activity yesterday. I mean, I knew about the other activity, all the hoses in the neighborhood pumping into the ditch and, multiple times vacuuming out the basement and taking sheetrock and carpet out and such. So it's been most inconvenient. I've never been to one of these before. I was kind of expecting I was going to hear you guys talk and then I could ask questions at the end. I really just came with a couple of questions, and one was, has anyone considered trying to get the governor to declare this a national disaster area and try to get some sort of assistance that way? And, had a wild idea that maybe if City of Derby doesn't want to use those pumps and furnish water to the City of Derby that way, maybe we could put a bottled water plant over there and pump some water out of there and use it for something productive in the future. So that's really about all I have. I'd appreciate if you guys vote for this and try and help these guys. I've heard it's going to cost $15,000 and 250 houses are affected, and that's like $60 a house, which is, a fraction of what we're paying in taxes. So anything you can do to help would be great. I realize this is fighting Mother Nature, and we all want to come up with some way to solve this. So anything you can do to help, thank you.
Thank you. That's the only individuals that we had signed up to speak on the public agenda today, but we'll give this opportunity if you missed a chance to sign up. Does anyone else in the room wish to speak on the public agenda this morning? Please state your name for the record. You have 3 minutes.
Teresa Vincent, I have a property at 3544 East 103rd Street Court, and Justin and Adriana Gruby couldn't be here today, so I'm going to kind of sum up what Justin wanted to say. If he could have came was, when the decision to shut off the wells was made, was there any studies done to help understand how this was going to affect those of us that were downstream, just living our life, loving our homes, taking care of our families, and that has pretty much made it impossible for us to do that. Our kids couldn't safely get home. They almost missed finals, but we were able to get them to school. Basically, these wells being shut down, was there any studies done? I know I didn't hear anything as somebody that lived there, and my kids go to Mulvane School. And what can we do now to kind of reverse that? Like, if you guys can't help, can you lead us in a direction where we could get some help? Because this seems to be the root cause of the issues that a lot of us are having with constant flooding. Jim, you've been to my home. We discussed the floodplain situation where we have to purchase insurance now, which the insurance that we're forced to pay for is not covering any of this, just so everybody understands that. So just do what you can to help. We're real people, real faces. And like they say, a lot of people are at work right now. A few of us were able to make it. So thank you.
Thank you. Approach the podium. State your name for the record, please. You have 3 minutes.
My name is Kathy Allen, and I live in Hancock Acres also. I am one of the lucky ones that my pump is just running continually, and we don't have water in our basement, but my husband has taken off work, and he is running himself ragged between, there's an 80-year-old woman that lives across the street that's alone, and hers pumped into her septic tank, and so he had to change it over so it would pump outside. It's coming up in her basement. She is not here because she can't hardly walk. And when the storm hit, our electricity went out. We were lucky enough to have a generator because nobody has any. A woman from Lowe's that worked there, she was calling everybody, and nobody could find one. They can't find sump pumps. And we had the neighbors next to us and across the street, we had electrical cords ran back and forth just so they could use our generator, and we hoped it would keep up with their basement and keep ours pumping too. So please do something, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else in the audience wish to speak this morning? Anyone else? Please approach the podium, state your name for the record.
My name's Bob Mintzer, M-I-N-T-Z-E-R. I live on 103rd Street South. And I kind of got a question for you guys. How many of you have ever had to deal with the water problems that we're dealing here in your own house from groundwater? So you kind of sympathize with us, you know what we're up against. Several years ago, and I don't know if any of you guys were on the board or not, but up on Hydraulic, there was a lot of flooding in a lot of houses up there. And yes, they still have groundwater and they're still pumping water, but you guys somehow came in and dug some 5 foot deep, maybe 6 foot deep, 5 or 6 foot wide ditches that bring it all down. All that water from up there that they're pumping out comes down to 95th Street and Hydraulic and goes into that field. So people in that area are suffering more because you helped the people further up the street. And I know there's more houses there and everything else, but we're still paying taxes just like everybody else out there. I don't know how anybody could think that running those wells wouldn't help everybody in that area. Is there a figure? I heard a figure mentioned earlier. There's a figure that how much it would cost to run 2 of those pumps for 60 days. Do you guys have a number? What was it?
Initially, it was believed to be between $12,000 and $15,000.
Okay, I don't know about anybody else. I know all the rest of us are paying at least $50 more a month to the electric company to keep our basements dry, our sewers working, and everything else. Is there any way we could do a special tax to help alleviate that, to make you guys say, hey, you know, if we got enough people on board, send a petition around, sign it, say, hey, I'll pay $50 extra a month because right now it's costing me that much. I don't know how you people could not have some compassion for these people that are constantly dealing with this for the last 3 months. I just don't understand it. It should have been done. It should have been taken care of. It should have been addressed years ago when those wells were shut down. Something drastically needs to be done. And right now I've got a 3-inch pump pumping from my property over to where you guys put in that sluway and pumps or whatever you did that runs to the river from Hillside and 103rd. And I know that when I run that pump for 4 hours, I can drop my groundwater almost a ½ an inch. I've got neighbors around me that said, thanks for doing that, because their basements went from 3 inches of water to 1 inch of water. So it makes a difference. And those big pumps would make a much bigger difference. Thanks.
Thank you. Does anyone else in the audience wish to speak today? Please approach the podium, state your name for the record. You have 3 minutes.
I'm Christy Gimbin. I live at 8244 Pittman Drive in Hancock Acres. My story is much the same as anybody else's, with the water coming in constantly through the floor. I would like to invite any or all of the commissioners to come out and see the area. I don't know if you've come out to actually view the widespread effect that this has had. I know back in your other meeting it was mentioned that turning on the pumps maybe would only affect 11 homes and help them. That's truly not the case. Back in 2016 when this happened and Derby turned on the pumps, we lived there. We've lived in this area for 20 years in this same home. And it really did make a difference when the pumps were turned on. We've not ever had a water problem before Derby. When Derby was using Derby area water, we did not have water problems in our basements. And for a long-term solution, if Mulvane, Derby, the county, Wichita, if you could all collaborate to come up with a solution for us in the county that is a large number of homes, hundreds of homes, it's not just a few people. Collaborate with a long-term solution where we could get the area groundwater being used usefully for area residents, whether it be rural water districts or Derby actually using that water again. That would be very helpful to keep the water table down so that we could not have this problem when we do have the torrential rains. And I know that God is in control of the weather and we cannot control what that does. We have had enormous amounts of rainfall, but when this does happen, when the water table's already high, that's when it affects us. But I would like to invite you all to come down and see the areas that are affected so that you can get more of a grasp of what's going on. Any of the residents would be willing to show you the areas that we're working with. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else in the audience wish to speak today? Please approach the podium, state your name for the record. You have 3 minutes.
Good morning. My name is Rachel Johnson. I live in Hancock Acres, 8123. I watched your guys' meeting from a couple weeks ago this morning to just get aware of what you guys were presenting and discussing. And I can tell you my house is actually a mile and a half away from one of those wells. And it did seek I can't think of the word. We did get some relief. Let's just put it that way. As your table that I'm actually looking at now, and according to your data, only 11 houses would be impacted, which is within, what, a mile and a half or a half mile? That's incorrect. My house is actually a mile and a half. So in 2016, we saw relief. Now, it might not be as grand as the homes that are closer to these wells, but there was relief. And just like everybody behind me that has spoken or those that have not, this is a constant, minute by minute, every day. I have 3 pumps in my house, along with 6 industrial-sized fans. I have 2 industrialized dehumidifiers, and it's constantly pumping. I don't think you understand, you yourself, unless you have physically been in our homes, not drive by, not get out of your car, not take pictures, physically stepping into our homes and walking down in our basements. A lot of my neighbors are retired, so they don't have the resources or the luxury that I do or some of our neighbors do. So I know for you it's easy to sit back and, look at this data and say, well, this or that. It's incorrect. As you can tell, if not already, very frustrated. I am a woman of faith, have always been at a young age. So right now, I'm putting my trust in God. And I'm hoping that there can be something you can do. Even if it's short term, we understand that. We understand that we also need to look at long term, but for right now, if we are just given a couple days or a couple weeks, but I can't wait 120 days for the weather to not rain and for my basement to dry out. According to the stats that was presented to you guys, it would take 120 days. Could you do that? I don't think so. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else in the audience wish to speak on this issue? Anyone else? I will close public comment at this time. And at this time, Madam Clerk, next item.
New business, item A, follow-up discussion regarding Sedgwick County's request that Derby operate 2 water wells to dewater the area around 95th Street South and Hillside.
Thank you. Mr. Spears?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, David Spears, Director of Public Works. We experienced near record rainfall in the month of May, and the wet weather pattern has extended through June. The groundwater table has risen around the county, particularly in the low-lying sandy soils along the Arkansas and Little Arkansas River channels. You've heard a number of complaints about flooding in basements due to high groundwater from residents in rural Sedgwick County who live in the area between the Kansas Turnpike and the Arkansas River from about 79th Street South to 103rd Street South. At your staff meeting on June 18th, Susan Erlenwine made a detailed presentation on the history of the area, the groundwater characteristics, and the scientific information that is available about the problem. At your commission meeting on June 19th, Commissioner Howell asked you to consider an off-agenda item related to groundwater-induced basement flooding in the same general area. After extensive discussion, the board agreed to ask the city of Derby to turn on 2 wells located near 95th Street South and Hillside for a period of 60 days in an attempt to lower the groundwater table in the area. Staff estimated the cost for 60 days of operation at $12,000 to $15,000. Based on the board's action, we immediately relayed your request to the city of Derby. Since last Wednesday, we have had continuing discussions with Derby. They've had questions, and we've responded quickly based on our experience in the area and technical knowledge. Late Friday, we received word that Derby did not believe they could fulfill our request. A number of things led to their decision. The city ceased operation of the pumps in 2003, 16 years ago, and they are not reliable. One of the pumps is not operational at this time. They do not know for sure why it won't run, but it's estimated a new pump would cost $35,000. They currently have 4 vacancies on their water utility staff and do not feel they have the staff resources to repair the non-operational pump. If only one pump runs, county staff believe that the effective radius of the cone of depression would be reduced from a half a mile to a quarter mile, and the benefit would be reduced to 2 or 3 homes. Given all of the information available, the city feels that there is a very, very low probability of success. We were in contact with Derby again yesterday. my sense is that while they still do not think the pumping will solve the problem, they seem willing to work with the county. They need a firm commitment from the county for up to $70,000 before they would start moving forward with the work. The purpose of this item is to present this new information to the board and provide an opportunity to discuss next steps. Susan Erlewine is here with me today, and we both stand for questions.
Thank you. Questions for Mr. Spears? Commissioner Howell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Did the City of Derby break down that $70,000? Does that include the repair of the one pump?
We asked them to break it down, and they do not have time to do it right now because of the storm damage. The city manager says they are too busy with other things right now and could not do it. But that is an estimate that they give us.
I guess I'm just asking whether or not, I'm not asking about the time that they would, when it would be done, but does this $70,000, as far as we know, include the repair and the operation of two pumps? That's what we're still talking about? That's why it's $70,000?
Yes, sir.
Do we know what the cost to operate the remaining operational pump, what would that cost? Do we know that?
They have not said.
Well, based on our previous estimate, I would assume it would be about half of what we estimated before. In other words, we said 12 to 15. If that was for two pumps, I would assume that to run one pump would be about half that value because it's operational. It doesn't require repair.
You could assume that, but I would not say that's correct.
Okay, so I think we need some clarity on exactly what they're talking about. I think that is imperative for us to make a decision going forward. I understand that $70,000 is a much bigger commitment on our part. But if we can turn on the single pump, in fact, might even like to look at the other pumps in the area. I know there's 11 water wells. Are there other water wells, in other locations that might have some benefit to the community as well? So if this, again, I don't know if it's number 10 or number 11 that has the operational issue, but the remaining pump, I think we ought to have a conversation about it still. And I'd like to know where the other 9 wells are to see whether or not there's, any other options in terms of trying to very carefully select the next best location and what that would be. To me, that's imperative to have that data for us to make a good logical decision moving forward. Okay.
Thank you. Commissioner O'Donnell.
Thank you, David. And I see Susan in the back of the room, and she might be able to give me some historical reference on why those two pumps were selected the last few times that we've done this, because I know the motion that we had last week was to turn on the same two pumps that were used last in 2016.
Because they're the closest pumps. That's why those are the ones looked at.
Some of the pumps are on the east side of the turnpike, and some are on the west side of the turnpike,
That's
right?
my understanding.
Okay.
I'd need to get a map from Derby to see where all of their wells are located.
Okay.
You mentioned something about historical reference.
Yes.
This has been a problem since the 1980s. I have a newspaper article here from 87 about flooding issues at Hillside and hydraulic and 87th Street South. I have letters from Commissioner Bill Hancock back in the 90s talking about the basement flooding from groundwater going into Peach Valley Estates there at Hydraulic. County actually paid for a study done by Summit back in the late 90s to determine the pumping rate and monitoring wells in the area to see if dewatering would work. So we were looking at this long before the Derby well was shut off. Derby wells were shut off, as was mentioned, in 2003. We were studying this back in the 90s as far as would the groundwater going up into the basements and needing dewatering. That's why more recently we hired Groundwater Associates to do a study on how would dewatering work specifically in the Peach Valley Estates. Bob Vincent was the head of Groundwater Associates. Unfortunately, he passed away recently, but he was considered the top hydrologist in the state of Kansas, and that comes from the Division of Water Resources. And he's the one who did the study on where the well placements would be for dewatering within Peach Valley Estates, what effect that would have, the distance of the cone of depression from the wells, and where they would be placed for the best effect for everybody in the area. As I mentioned before, the cost for this, the main cost was getting the water out of the area. If you just pump it on the ground in the area, you're repeating the problem. It's just soaking back in. You need to get it out. And that was the, I believe, $1,300,000 figure of the whole project, which was over $2 million. And it would have needed the citizens in that area to agree to subsidize that through an improvement district, and they decided not to.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Howell?
So based on your comment, if we knew there was high water table issues going on back in the 1980s, it would have been known then in 2003 when the wells were shut down. This was going to likely add to that problem. So that was a known impact at that time.
Yes, but I'm sure when Derby was negotiating with the City of Wichita on purchasing water, as you know, Derby's appropriations were limited. They needed more water for a growing city, so they purchased water from Wichita, and part of that agreement was those wells would be turned off. And if they continued with those wells, they'd have to build a water treatment plant.
Well, first of all, let me just say, I respect Derby as a city. I respect the elected leaders that made the decision. I respect their right to make any decision that's best for their citizens. That's their job. And so with that, I respect that. But I am curious, I'm wondering where did the idea that not using some of the water from the area, why would that not be reasonable to, again, I don't know how to say this. I know we are where we are. We can't change that. But when they made a decision to not use those water wells and knowing it was going to have an impact on people, I guess I'd like to go back in time and see the conversation as to why that would not be included as part of the solution going forward. They needed more water, and getting Wichita water was obviously the right choice, but it seems like you ought to be using both the well water and Wichita water, and if it requires a water treatment plant, that's another discussion. We ought to maybe talk about that. It was just a few years ago, Wichita talked about a 1-cent sales tax that would have raised hundreds of millions of dollars for enhancing our water quantity for the community, for the region. And Wichita sells their good water to many communities, not just Derby. But we talked about a sales tax just recently, trying to enhance, if you will, the quantity of water available for our region because there's so much dependence on Wichita for that good water. And so it seems like to offset some of that pressure, the water wells would certainly be a great regional discussion. And at the same time, it would potentially help thousands of people who are right now being impacted by high water. So I guess I'd like to maybe at some point have a longer term conversation about how those water wells might play into a regional water supply discussion.
Well, I think from the scientific studies done by the hydrologists, the cone of depression affects a small area. So you'd have to have a dewatering system around an area. Even the Peach Valley Estates, there were 3 dewatering wells for that area. This is in alluvial aquifer, the deposits from the Arkansas River meandering back and forth through time, depositing these sands. It's very permeable. It yields a lot of water. And so anyone who lives in that from northwest Sedgwick County down to where it exits in the south central part of the county will have high water table.
I feel like we need to circle back and have some clarity to some of these questions. I guess my question is, it was known, everyone knew at the time that when they turned these wells off, it was going to have an additional negative impact on people who are struggling with this groundwater. I guess I'd like to know if that's in fact true, that there was a knowledge of that when that decision was made.
I have no idea. I wasn't at the meetings between Derby and the city of Wichita.
Okay. Yeah, I respect every governing body's right to make the decisions they make that's best for them at the time. So I'm not wanting to second guess, but I do think that if we would reconsider potentially using some of that water in a productive way, we obviously need water, and it's good quality water. I hate to see that dewatered and put into the river anyway, because it's, as the chairman said before, it's drinking water. It maybe needs to have some treatment, but it's not surface water. And so we ought to. So one of the speakers mentions we ought to collaborate with Wichita and Mulvane and Hayesville and Derby. I think that's maybe our mission. We ought to maybe have a different discussion about how the county might facilitate some collaboration between these different governing bodies. This is a tremendously great resource, and if we were to use it, it would certainly help out these folks.
I agree. Last time we pumped this area, we pumped out over 240 million gallons of water into the river. So water is a resource, and it's a shame to just pump it away into the river. We'd have to find a use for it. But the map you see up on the screen is the one that Groundwater Associates created. The two red dots are the wells we're talking about, number 10 and 11. I do not know which well is not working at this time. And the yellow dots are the homes nearby. This they created having both wells pumping 700 gallons per minute, and the drawdown of those circles is after 60 days, what you'd see. So the green ring, the furthest away from the wells, is showing that you'd have less than a foot drawdown after 60 days of pumping both wells constantly at 700 gallons a minute. The blue circle is around 2 foot drawdown. The red one's 3, and the very light blue is 4 foot drawdown in 60 days. So one well pumping, you're going to shrink that to about where the blue line is for the 1 foot drawdown after 60 days. When you're talking about additional wells, even if you'd have to do a study looking at all the wells anyone had in that area, doing a study and seeing how they overlap to see what effect they would have.
Did PEC do the study?
PEC then used this information for their study on getting the water out of Peach Valley Estates.
I was actually supposed to be at PEC right now to do a tour, but I had to cancel that for this meeting this morning. But I appreciate all the experts in the community. But I would just say this is a analytical, scientific guess at what might happen. This is not based on actual history. This is based on what we think would happen.
They used the pumping data that was done in the past to determine the rate of flow.
Well, how do we answer the constituents that have come to us this morning that said that they were a mile and a half from these wells when it was turned on in 2016, and they saw not just 4-month improvement, but they saw improvement, and I've talked to a number of them, so they saw improvement nearly immediately, and they saw continuing assistance. They saw a definite decrease in their issues when the wells were turned on, and much further than a half mile. So how do I answer that?
I'd like to know when the last rain event was in relation to when the wells were turned on and when they saw the drop in their basement. Especially north of here, groundwater in the county moves from northwest to southeast. So water going into the basements a mile north of here is coming from the northwest into those basements. So what was happening northwest of there as well?
Is anybody from the county driven around the area to look at the ditches to see why water's not moving towards the river? Is there something inherent to that area that doesn't allow water to flow towards the river?
I know that the county has done ditch improvements in the past. Maybe David could better address that, but I know Scott Lindenbach has worked in that area. Mentioned earlier, widening the ditches, getting the surface water to flow out of it better. Because as surface water stands in an area, it's going to be soaking back into the ground and adding to the water table. David?
Just to add on, we built a storm sewer pipe down there to collect water and take it over to the Arkansas River. It has a flap gate on it. When the river gets up over that, though, the flap gate shuts so that water won't backflow into the system. But that was quite an expensive project we did several years ago with the storm sewer.
And I think that's great information, and I think that we've had some high water coming down the river that flap gate hasn't been able to open a certain part of that time. But I think we're having a continuing problem right now, and that's not what's going on. The river's recessed enough that flap gate should be working, and there's still water that's not flowing in that direction. So I'm just curious, what is the inherent infrastructure situation that the water can't flow where it needs to flow? I don't know if it's the township that needs to have some assistance, some expertise from the county. Is there anybody that can identify the reason that water's not flowing? Maybe I ought to have a fresh look at that. Because when you put water outside your home and it has no place to flow, it's obviously going to come right back in again.
Right. Certainly we can get with Scott Lindenback and the township people to look over the ditches and see where the issues lie and see what could be done. But as David Spears mentioned, we have in the past done expensive projects in that area. And even those projects, a dewatering well was put in so that stormwater pipe could be put in the ground.
Okay.
And remember, dewatering pumps are permitted from the state, and they're usually only for 6 months. They're usually used for building a building or a road project where you have high water table and you need to get the water out of the area to finish a project, and the permit expires. So I talked to DWR about if we had dewatering wells in this area, could we make them permanent? And they agreed to that. But there's a lot of work that we'd have to do with the state. It's not just Derby saying yes or no, then the state has to say yes or no to turning the pumps on.
And I understand that, and we think we described that pretty accurately at the last meeting. That was two decisions had to be made downstream of us. That would be, and they both have the right to say yes or no. And if they both say yes, then we might be able to solve some of this or help some people potentially.
That's right.
But either one of them could say no, and what we saw was that the first one said no. And I would tell you, we do need to have two different conversations: the short term and the long term. And I think the long term is a much needed conversation, and we've got to drill into that and find some long term solutions. But in the short term, I'm still in favor of seeing some whatever we can do to help folks. If we can move water by touching these ditches in some way, if we can survey the area and see where the problems are, if we can work with Derby to get the one pump turned on, possibly look for a secondary pump that might help. I think those are things we ought to be willing to do. I agree this is not a long-term solution. This is not what we should be doing for the next 100 years.
No.
There's got to be a long-term solution. I think we have to have the other conversation. But today people are struggling. And so I'm empathetic. I'm compassionate. I want to have compassion and kindness towards those folks. They've grown to understand when the county has done this in the past, they saw immediate results, and they saw some relief. It didn't solve all the problems, but it helped somewhat. And this is like the fifth or sixth time I've actually lost track that this has been considered. The first few times that this was done, I think it was done at the request of a commissioner without even having a public discussion. The last time this was done was in 2016. We had a public discussion in a staff meeting that wasn't recorded. And then we moved forward with consensus to go forward, and we commissioned the study, which we're reflecting on today. Mm-hmm. Today we're having a much more big discussion, but we're only talking about 60 days, not 180 days, not 6 months. We're talking about a short term for 60 days, and we're talking about one pump potentially, maybe two if we can find another one that would help. And we're talking $10,000 perhaps, maybe less, depends on how many pumps we can get turned on. Last time we spent right at $15,000 to run two pumps for 4 months. We moved 242 million gallons of water, and that was about $15,000. It's hard for me to imagine that one pump would cost anywhere near the cost we paid last time. Right. And I think that for us to turn our back on these folks that are struggling is not the right thing to do. I want to do what we can to help them, and then let's have a longer-term discussion going forward. So with that, I will ask my colleagues certainly to make whatever comments you want to make. I want to make a motion here in just a moment, and with that, I'll stand by and see what happens. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I've got a couple questions. First of all, I did get a call from Senator Kirshen, and he mentioned the ditches were not flowing, and then I heard it again from the audience today. I understand it's Salem Township. Is that the township that is responsible for the ditches down there?
That's correct.
Have we talked to them and see what they can do to try and clean these ditches out? Because I agree, if they're pumping stuff out with a sump pump and they dump it in a ditch and it doesn't go anywhere, it's going right back into the groundwater, and they're going to have to pump it out again. So it's just a cycle. I think one of the steps we need to take is talk to Salem Township and see if they can get these ditches cleaned out so that we can get the water flowing. Okay. Another speaker today spoke about declaring a disaster area, and actually we asked that exact thing during our staff meeting here a week or so ago. And from what I understand, that it does not meet the standard to declare a disaster area. So I just wanted to make sure everybody understands that. We asked that question because we were concerned to see if there was something that we could do, and we were told no, we could not do that. Another speaker today asked why we were having this meeting today, and I want to make sure that we answer that. Is that Derby has a meeting tonight, and Derby couldn't make any decisions tonight unless they know which direction we're going to go. So it's imperative that we had to have a special meeting because we can't throw Derby under the bus and say make a decision tonight when they don't know if we're going to fund anything moving forward. So I hope everyone understands we were not trying to do something that was nefarious. We're not trying to cover this up. We're not trying to not have the public here. We just had to take some action today because Derby is expected to take some action tonight, and we absolutely could not put Derby in a situation where they didn't have all the information to make a decision on. So I hope everyone understands that. And I heard a speaker talk about that. I also heard a speaker today talk about a special improvement district. Now, we asked Peach Valley Estates here 2016 or so if they'd like to have a special assessment improvement district, and the cost was around $2 million for that, and so they decided that they didn't want to have a special improvement district. But if the citizens in this area are interested in a special improvement district to help fund this, we will explore that. I don't see that anyone is against that idea because we've already explored it one time for Peach Valley. I just want you to understand that we've done it once and the cost was around $2 million, and so I don't know what a cost would be down here. But if you're interested in moving forward with a special improvement district, we can get with our attorneys and see what it would take to set up a special improvement district to solve this long term. So that may be a long-term solution if you all are interested in doing something like that. I'm not trying to turn that idea off by any means, but a special improvement district, the citizens have to ask for that, have to sign a petition. I don't know, Mr. Papoon, is 51% of the homeowners in the area would require for a special assessment district?
I believe that's correct, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, if I interrupt, we would have to hire a consultant to figure out what it would cost, too. People really won't sign a petition if they don't know what it's going to cost. You'd have to hire like we did just at Peach Valley.
Right.
We have not done that for Hancock.
Okay. The analysis that was done on Peach Valley Estates, Bob Vincent did that. I knew, because he passed away here very recently, he was my neighbor, so I've known him for 20-some years. He's probably the preeminent expert, was at that time, on water from all over the state of Kansas and beyond the state of Kansas. So I trust his analysis. I do not believe anyone can say that this is a wild guess because Mr. Vincent was the recognized expert exactly what happens with water. So I trust that analysis completely.
I'd also like to add his son, Brad Vincent, is carrying on with the company.
Okay. One of the questions that we have, Mr. Spears notified us that the City of Derby wants about a $70,000 commitment to be able to move forward. And part of that, from what I understand, is that if that second pump fails, then we need to be liable for that because we're the ones that would cause it to fail. So I don't know exactly where we go with that, but the bottom line is that we are going to assume more liability if we decide to turn on that second pump. The other wells in the area, I'm not sure where that they're located. How are they connected so that they could get that water if we turned on any other wells? How would it get to the river? Is there an interconnected system?
I do not know what their system is down there. We'd have to work with their public works director, Robert Mendoza, to determine where the layout is of the wells and the piping associated with it, and see if new pipes would have to be developed to divert the water.
Okay. Well, that would be an important decision point on talking about other wells because we don't even know how we get the water from the other wells to the river. I've got concerns about the entire county because this is not the only location in Sedgwick County that we are having problems. Commissioner Cruz has water in her basement. We have other individuals throughout the county that have water in the basement. When we say that we're going to single out one area and pay $70,000, commit that much, it's a concern to me, because now we're setting a precedence, and the next group is going to be here next week saying they've got water in their basement, and what are we going to do at that point in time? I'm not unsympathetic, though. I listened to everyone and what they had to say today, and I'm truly not unsympathetic with the situation that you've got right now. I'm just not convinced that turning these pumps on is what the solution is going to be. That's the problem. We've got analysis up on the screen right now that if both pumps ran, that there's going to be very limited effect on 11 houses. And houses beyond that, and I've heard anecdotal experience that possibly that they helped out, but it's anecdotal. So I'm kind of in a quandary right now. I don't know, truly. I do have some sympathy, but I don't know that it's the best solution for the county, for all the citizens in the county, to commit $70,000 worth of tax money, which is going to come out of all across the county, and it's not going to satisfy work in other areas. So, Commissioner Meitzner.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question about, so Commissioner Howe, when you were instrumental at the state level with the new legislation and the tax relief on the Oaklawn tornado, have you explored how we can do tax relief for something like this, which is flooding, and it's all disaster?
Yeah, so Mr. Chairman, if you don't mind.
Sure.
That legislation requires 50% of the home to be destroyed or substantially destroyed, and before it triggers the opportunity for local government to abate taxes for 1 year. Without that legislation, the county, I don't believe, has the authority to abate taxes for individual property owners. That authority does not available to us statutorily, except for that bill creates a provision in that situation that the house is 50% destroyed or substantially destroyed by all kinds of, there's a list of things that can happen now, including fires and floods and tornadoes and hurricanes, earthquakes, you name it. Floods would be part of that, but it has to be 50% before it could be considered for a 1 year abatement on property taxes. So, you know, Oaklawn had a tornado, and that was the focus at the time. This is not legislation that would empower us to do what you're asking.
So, accordingly, the county, as a governing body, we could not consider waiving the county portion of taxes on a dedicated area for a period of time to save these people some, as I referred to, $50 a month type environment.
I don't know the mechanism we can do that right now, Commissioner.
Right. But if we didn't have to go to the state, we could look into that legally to see if we can make an abatement to help relieve the costs.
We'd have to take a look at that, Commissioner. I'm not prepared at this moment to address that question.
Okay.
Anything else?
No, thank you.
Commissioner Cruz.
Thank you, Chairman. I just want to say that this situation is very emotional. I myself walked down to my basement and was greeted by very cold water on my feet. So I get it. I myself ripped out all of my sheetrock because it is a tough thing to deal with. I had to pay somebody to come in and remove mold, because I didn't want to do it myself. So I want to let you guys know that I'm very sympathetic to your situation. But I have to think about last week during the meeting, I wanted to table this conversation until we could talk to the other leaders around our region, because it's important for us to work together. Just yesterday, I contacted Councilman Johnson to see what we could do as far as figuring out how the water works, right? I want to go tour the water plant. I want to get other leaders involved. because this is really a whole problem here in Sedgwick County. My neighborhood in Sherwood Glen, I don't know how many people have ripped out and have water still in their basements as well. So this is not just a problem that affects you guys. And I really want you guys to know that I get your problem. And I want to be sympathetic, and I am sympathetic to you. I am concerned about, one, pumping all the water away. I am concerned about that. My environmental hat goes off about pumping good water away. The next thing is I don't feel like I know exactly how much it's going to cost. I've heard $12,000, $15,000, $70,000. I don't know how much this is going to cost. So to me, it's hard to make a decision when I don't really know all the variables. I do know one thing. I trust Susan, and I have come to really find what the information that she gives me is credible. And I have to believe in the experts that do this day in and day out, that what they're telling us is accurate information. So with that being said, I just want to say that I am sympathetic to your situation.
Thank you. Commissioner O'Donnell.
Thank you. To follow up on what Commissioner Meissner was saying, I also talked to the manager about some type of property tax abatement or relief. I think one of the ways that we could handle it, and I'll have to work with Ms. Lapoon on that, is working with the appraiser's office. And people can't appeal their taxes legally without necessarily needing state legislation to do it, because clearly whatever we have these homes appraised at today, with water standing in their basement and all these other issues, it's not worth, they couldn't sell their houses for what we have. So that's something that I want to continue to pursue and look into, because it is a huge problem. And I understand when people say they're paying their property taxes and they want support, it makes a lot of sense. But it makes more sense to me that we need to look at ways to help them and go through the normal process of property tax appeals, because that's a very legitimate concern and something that I want to look into. So, Commissioner House speaking.
Well,
So, okay.
I thought you were done. I can wait.
No, that's fine.
Go ahead.
Okay. Commissioner Meissner.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that when I heard this 10,000 number last time, 10, 12, 8,000, 4,000 a month, whatever it was, I double checked, and that was just the invoices that were sent to the county, mainly electric bill. So I know that Derby had personnel going out every day, and they had a lot of other maintenance and emergency repairs that they were doing during that period. So this 70,000 number, I don't even know if you can cut it in half or whatever, because there's, as you referenced before, they've got the additional personnel problems and electric rates or whatever. So there's some unknowns there. So it's not just a small amount or half of the 12,000 that we would be looking at. That's probably why Derby said up to 70,000 commitment, and whatever it is. I don't think Derby would put 70,000 in there or just charge us 70 for 70, but I do think that they did their best guess in the last minute to try to estimate that cost. Is that correct from your perspective, Dave?
That's correct. That's what I understand.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I agree with Commissioner O'Donnell. We talked about having the appraiser go down and take a look at all the homes down there. I think that's something that needs to be done. If there's no other way of giving property tax relief on this through a waiver or something like that, if there's problems with the property, it probably isn't worth exactly what they've got it on their books for appraisal. So I asked the manager to get with our appraiser and have them appraise, and we don't need a mass appraisal on this thing. They're going to have to look at the properties. So I know it's going to take some effort for them, but I hope the homeowners are willing to help us look at the properties physically, because a mass appraisal will just drive by and not see what the extent of the problems are. So we need to take a look at that. Commissioner Howell.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a couple of questions. The Peach Valley I'll just say, dewatering pumping system that we had proposed last time. Would have been a special improvement, an improvement district of some sort, taxing jurisdiction that would have provided operational support to that and pay for the infrastructure over time.
And the maintenance over time.
Right, and that was about 180 homes, and included in that infrastructure was a 2-mile long, 24-inch drainage line that would go to the Cowskin Creek.
Correct.
And that was very expensive. And I think we surveyed the homeowners in that area, and it appeared to not be a majority of them that wanted to do this, in what would have been probably the taxing jurisdiction. So having said that, I guess they've been proposed an idea, and at this time they seem to not be interested in that particular idea as a solution. But for Hancock Acres, I think there's 99 homes, and one of the people that lives there said, well, I'm not sure Peach Valley would have helped us anyway because it's kind of far away, but we would like to have a similar system proposed for our area. And they are literally half-mile from the Arkansas River. In fact, they would back up to the big ditch. I don't know if that's important or not, but if we were allowed to do it, the MS Mitch Mitchell floodway on July 3rd, if we were able to put water into that, which obviously could carry plenty of water, that's 100 yards from Hancock Acres. Worst case is moving that water to the Arkansas River, which is a half-mile away. And it'd be 99 homes. I would assume you don't need a 24-inch line. So I can imagine this would be a much smaller system and a very much reduced cost to install this. I would like to see our proposal modified and estimated for Hancock Acres and give them a chance to contemplate that as a solution for their community. And doesn't mean that it will go forward. It just means it's upon us to, I think, at their request, to estimate what that would cost. If there seems to be support for it, go ahead and get the engineering firmed up, and then go back and ask them for their support or approval for that, and then we can go ahead and get started with that. That might be a long-term solution for those 99 homes. That would be something we need to talk about. In terms of the entire county having problems, I agree. There's problems throughout the county. And what makes this uniquely interested in why we're talking about this area is because the 11 water wells are sitting there. And there is history. This is not just a one-time event. This is a continuing issue. It's going on for a long time. And we've helped out in the past. I am sympathetic towards others. Commissioner Cruz, I'm sorry you're going through this. I think it's a horrible situation, and I'm glad that I'm not having to live through it right now, and I feel sorry for those that are dealing with it. I have compassion towards them. And if I could help everybody in some similar way, I think that's a great discussion. If we could help the entire county with a small expenditure that would help alleviate some of their problem, I would want to have that conversation. But that's not an option for most areas across the county. This is unique to this area because there are water wells that could be used. To the extent we don't probably want to approve a $70,000 firm commitment, that seems a little difficult to stomach. And I think we don't even know what we're getting with that. We don't know if we're talking about replacing and repairing pumps that may not be used in the future. We don't know what that means. We don't have the information. I guess I'd like to relate two stories real quickly, then I'll make a motion. I'm a member of a church in Derby, and I was a trustee on that board for over 20 years. And they built a new sanctuary. They had water coming up in the middle of the sanctuary for between services. They would have water come up through the carpet in the sanctuary. We struggled with that for many, many years until one year I finally dug a gigantic hole outside their building on the downhill side of their facility. We dug a hole about 15 feet deep, and so that water could drop into that hole. We installed some large pumps in there and pumped water down the hill to the retention pond, and that immediately solved the problem. And I reflect on that thinking that was a big problem for that church. It was $1 million facility, maybe $2 million facility. And that simple solution solved the problem for many years. And then they went ahead and added on to the building that seemed to take care of the problem. The problem was clearly groundwater leaching into the ground and coming in under the sanctuary. That's what was happening. And when they added more facility to the area, the problem went away entirely. So I am a little bit familiar with that. My neighbor to the east of me one day her husband was gone, and she was in a panic mode because water was coming into her basement. My wife and I went over there and we bailed water with her. Her sump pump wasn't keeping up, and I went outside in the rain and I realized the water was being pumped out. It was going right along the foundation, right into the basement again, and it was coming right back in the house again. We were just cycling water, and so I went out there as quickly as I could, and I blocked that passageway, and it seemed to stop the problem. There are solutions that can be done. We've got to have a longer term conversation. This is a Band-Aid, clearly. This is not a permanent solution. We have helped out in the past, and I'm just asking us to be compassionate and help them out this time, and let's go on to the longer term conversation. That's what we need to do. I've said that with clarity last time we talked about this. I understand we're worried about the $70,000, and maybe Derby would say, without $70,000, we're just not going to do that, and that's fine. I don't want to add stress to them in any way. But I think for us and our constituents, I would like to propose something. Here's my proposal, and I will make a motion, Mr. Chairman. We would limit our cost to $15,000. That should be enough to run one and possibly two pumps. We can try to find another pump that would be reasonable if the infrastructure is in place to move the water to where it needs to go. If it's only one pump until we run out of money, $15,000. So 60 days is off the table. Let's authorize $15,000, and that in terms of salary for the staff to go out there and check the pumps. It is electricity to run that pump or pumps until we run out of money. So $15,000 offered to Derby to turn on that one pump, and possibly two pumps if they can find a good candidate for a second pump with infrastructure. My motion is to approve $15,000 for the purpose of dewatering the area, and that's my motion. Thank you.
Second. Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Commissioner Cruz.
So, just a couple of clarifying questions. When did we discover that the pump wasn't working? Because I just heard about that yesterday.
David received the info.
Right, Derby. After last Wednesday, we contacted Derby and said we wanted to go on with it. They went out then, end of last week, to check the pumps and make sure they had run. One of them would not run.
Okay, and so what condition is the other pump in?
Well, their description to us is unreliable, but it's running. But we don't know, no one knows how long it'll run, and may run for 60 days. It may not, but they're old. So we don't know.
So the motion on the table is for us to approve $15,000 when Derby has said to us that they need $70,000. Is that correct?
Derby wants a commitment from the county of $70,000. That was I have it in an email from Kathy Sexton.
I don't understand why we're not having a conversation with the Derby leaders. That's where I'm struggling with this. I feel like, we should be communicating as both governmental bodies to say, hey, what's the best solution for our community? That's where I'm struggling with this. It sounds like we're telling them what to do and they're telling us what to do, when really we should be sitting in the same room talking about it. So I don't understand why we can't do that. I don't know what's appropriate, but I think that that's what we need to do. So if he makes this motion, we have to vote on this motion. Is that correct? Or I can make a substitute motion.
Yes, you can always make a substitute motion, Commissioner, but I might also add that if we're going to, that Commissioner Howell might want to actually amend the action taken by the Board of County Commissioners last Wednesday, June 19th, to include the limit of $15,000 so that we're, and I can help with the language there if you like, Commissioner Howell, but back to your question, Commissioner Cruz, you can make a substitute motion at this time. Yeah.
So I was under the impression that last week that's what it was going to cost, was around $15,000 to turn both of them on, right? So amending the motion to say the same amount of money, because that's what we had planned last week. So what would make the motion any different than what we voted on last week? More than one well, I guess, because one's broken, but
just the cap of $15,000, which wasn't expressly stated last week, Commissioner.
Okay, so what happens if Derby says no?
We're probably right back where we are today.
There was no dollar limit on the motion from June 19th. It was just to request that they turn on the two pumps. And no ceiling, no minimal.
So the $15,000 was just for the electrical
Discussion.
costs? There wasn't like because I was informed there were additional costs for personnel to go out. So it could be more than $15,000 last week.
Right. The electrical cost before, and Susan, maybe you have, it was, I think, around $6,000 a month.
It's $5,400 average.
Back to you, Jim.
Before I go back to Commissioner Howell, I agree with Commissioner Cruz that we haven't been talking to Derby. We took an off-agenda item last time with no staff research whatsoever, and moved ahead with something that we never talked once to the city of Derby about. And that's not the way that we run a county, with putting off-agenda items that have not been staffed that are going to impact our community. So we have a problem there, number one. Number two, if we spend $15,000, Groundwater Associates did a very thorough study of this. And spending $15,000, I am not convinced that that will solve the problem. However, I think that there's a problem down there. And if we're going to spend money, the wise place to spend money is to develop a long-term solution to this rather than put a Band-Aid on it and give a placebo effect to the community saying that we've done something, because I'm not convinced that turning one well on is going to correct anything at this point in time, and to get two wells up is probably going to cost us much more than $15,000. So we paid $40,000, was it, for Groundwater Associates?
No, that was the PEC study. It was several thousand for groundwater.
Okay. I would much rather spend money to do a research for a long-term solution down here to figure out what we can do for the community rather than put a Band-Aid on it with something that's short-term. So, Commissioner Howell?
Yeah, a couple of things. Number one, I want to be really clear. We're not telling anybody. I said this last week. We'll say it again. We're not telling anybody what to do. We're simply asking as a body. We're having a conversation with a motion which would result in an action item on behalf of the county to ask Derby to do this. I do not represent Sedgwick County. Neither do any of my colleagues represent Sedgwick County. And the manager of Derby and the mayor of Derby and others on the council do not represent the city of Derby by themselves. It requires an open public meeting like we're having today. This is the right place and the right time to have the conversation. And if we're going to make a request to Derby, it should come from us on this board in a public open meeting. We are following the right process. We simply asked Derby if they would consider doing something that we've done in the past to help people. And I understand the open-endedness of the motion last week is problematic. And with that, I understand that there's some concern about where this is headed. I don't think we want to spend $100,000. I've heard people talk about six figures and more. I think there's issues with spending that amount of money, but to spend $5,000 for a month to pump two pumps, as we did in 2016, and people saw immediate relief, not just by those pumps, but all over the place. We can argue about whether that was because the rain stopped and the water table naturally dropped, or whether that was a result of us pumping. We don't know. There's a science behind it, but the reality is those things seem to correlate, and for whatever reason, it is believed by many people in the area that if we wanted to help them, this is one thing we could do to help them. If you guys want to abate taxes, each one of these homes is probably paying around $2,000 a year in taxes. If we could abate their taxes for 1 year, that's $2,000 per home, let's just say. That also impacts the schools and the townships and everything else. That decision is overarching. It's not just Sedgwick County. So if we wanted to abate taxes, that's $2,000 per home, if we could do it. And we can't legally do that. However, we can spend $5,000 or $10,000 to hopefully help these people. Whether it actually really helps, I don't know. It's hard. It's impossible to say for sure. But to limit this to $15,000 and simply say, Derby, we ask, we request, would you be willing to help these people outside your city with this? And if you would be, that'd be great. And if you want to charge staff time to go out there and turn these on and to monitor these things, we're asking you to do that. And you can say yes or you can say no. And I respect you either way. It is their sovereign choice. And we limit our exposure to $15,000. Now, I'll just say these wells have been in place for, not just for a few years. Some of these wells have been in place for many decades. And maybe they have to update the pumps once in a while. I don't know the details there. But I seriously doubt that if the well turns on, that we're going to expose ourselves to hundreds of thousands of dollars or even $75,000 or $70,000. To me, if a pump fails and they have no intention of ever turning the wells back on for municipal water supply, why would we spend the money, government dollars, no matter whose dollars it is, to repair a well that's defunct and has no future value to anybody? If the pump fails, do they really want us to spend tax dollars to fix that pump at that point? I would say probably not. So let's just ask Derby and give them a request and say, well, we'd like to put $15,000 towards this, and let's use it the best way we possibly can to help these people. It's a reasonable request. And I don't want to make anybody mad. I'm not strong-arming anybody. I'm not trying to put anybody in a bad situation. We're simply being kind and compassionate, trying to help people the way we have in the past. And I respect Derby's right to make a choice, yes or no. And if they want to help, we love the help. If they want to say no, and they have reasons why, that's fine. Okay, I respect them. I think all we're doing is in a public open meeting, making a board decision to make a request, and I trust my staff, our great staff, to go and have that conversation on our behalf. That should be the way this is done, not me calling the mayor or anybody here for that matter making arrangements, behind the scenes. This needs to be public open meetings. And I appreciate the fact we're doing this today so we can have a meeting tonight in the city of Derby. I plan on being there. And I hope we can pass something today so I can stand there and say, the board says. Mr. Chairman, I would make a motion to amend last week's motion, to rescind what we did last Wednesday. Let's clarify it again. Going forward, I want to ask the city of Derby, and then permission subsequently for the state of Kansas, to turn on whatever water wells we possibly can at a cost of up to $15,000 to Sedgwick County. That's it. Thank you, sir.
Second.
Thank you. Commissioner Cruz?
So I am new to this, but let me just ask a question. An open meeting is something that we can send out to the media, and we could meet as a governmental body with Derby's governmental body if we say that it's an open meeting. It doesn't have to be here and have to be done there. Am I wrong?
No, you can have an en banc meeting with the governing body of the city of Derby, and it could be anywhere.
So when he implies that I'm trying to have a closed-door meeting with somebody, that is incorrect, because that's not what I was trying to say. I'm trying to say that I think that we could discuss this in an open format, all of us together, if we're both going to be on the hook for something when it comes to helping the citizens.
Yes, we could have an en banc meeting with the city of Derby, or we could have selected commissioners meet with selected members of the city of Derby if it wouldn't violate the Open Meetings Act with either governing body, or we could have staff of the county meet with staff of the city of Derby to have meetings.
So just because things have always been done that way doesn't mean that they have to be done that way?
No.
Okay.
Commissioner Howell?
Just once again, so we've had 2 en banc meetings since I've been a commissioner. I'm in my 5th year. We can do that, and that's a great idea. There's an urgency to this. People down there are suffering right this minute. I don't represent, unless you guys will empower me with a message, I'd be glad to go represent this board and have a commissioner represent Sedgwick County. I'm glad to do that if you empower me to do so. But I can't take it upon myself to go do that. And I'm asking for the board to make a decision to communicate with Derby, and they have a meeting tonight. What a great opportunity. If you want to empower a commissioner or 2 commissioners to go have a meeting with a couple of people in Derby, that's fine. But we ought to have that discussion at this time as well. So, the idea we go off on our own and have these conversations, making deals with another city without
making deals, Jim.
without the support of the board is not okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, we're getting ready to decide what to do with the motion at this point in time. I cannot support the motion as it exists currently, and I'll tell you why. Is it doesn't solve your problem. It's going to be put a Band-Aid on what you've got. I could support an alternate motion that we take a look at a long-term solution to this area, but so that we can solve this in the future. Otherwise, we're going to be sitting here next year if we got a rainy season next spring, and you're going to be asking us the same exact thing. We're not going to fix what your problem is. I hope you understand that. So I am very sympathetic with what you're saying. I don't believe that what we're talking about in this motion is going to solve your problem. Any other discussion?
Can we repeat the motion, and was there a second?
There was a second.
There was, okay.
Madam Clerk, can you repeat the motion as exists?
Commissioner Howell requested to rescind last week's motion and to include the cost of up to $15,000 for the city of Derby to turn on 1 or 2 pumps.
Okay. Mr. Papoon, do you agree that that's
Yes,
a
I
legal
mean,
motion?
I can take a stab at a motion if you want.
That'd be fine. I'd also just say there's no time limit. Simply, we'll put $15,000 toward the problem and do the best we can. It would be consumed with staff time, 1 pump, 2 pumps, however many days it goes. $15,000 is our cap. That's all I'm saying.
I mean, what I understand Commissioner Howell to say is that he wants to rescind the action taken by the Board of County Commissioners at the January 19th regular Board of County Commission meeting, and to amend and to furthermore coordinate with the City of Derby and State of Kansas to turn on water wells 10 and 11 with a cap of $15,000.
I'd like to say, again, if there's a broken well, I'm not saying we should repair that well. That's not what I'm asking. I'm saying turn on any operational wells, 10 and 11, 10 or 11 as is available, and other wells potentially if there's something else that makes sense. I don't want to define which wells we're talking about. So
Turn on
please.
any operational wells with the cap of $15,000.
There you go. Thank you.
Okay. Everyone clear on the motion?
Yep.
Okay, Madam Clerk, call the roll.
Commissioner O'Donnell?
Aye.
Commissioner Cruz?
No.
Commissioner Howell?
Aye.
Commissioner Meitzner?
No.
Chairman Dennis?
No. Do we have any other issues to come before the board at this time? Say none, we're adjourned. Thank you.